So the Chancellor sat down less than an hour ago. Always it takes a while for the impact of a budget to sink in, but there's enough for us to get our teeth into straight away. I've got three of my colleagues, Cicero colleagues, Chris Hughes, Lizzy Tomlin and Tom Frackowiak with me. Chris, first of all, what are the big headlines from the budget?
Well, the government have been pushing the message that austerity is coming to an end, and the OBR forecasts have given the government a little bit of room to manoeuvre and start loosening the public spending taps a bit. We already know that the government have pledged more money to the NHS, but I think it's worth putting in context the amount of money that has been promised, 20 billion over the next couple of years, a huge amount of money, and that the Treasury now has to try and find. There is also more money for social care, more money for the high street, 1 billion for defence, more money for roads, infrastructure. So I think we're starting to see the government loosening the public spending taps a bit. Labour will only say it's a drop in the ocean, but...
And obviously that, Tom, is designed to play through on this narrative that was laid out by the Prime Minister about the end of austerity.
Yes, and the framing of this speech was very much about a brighter future, very much about hard-working families, and as you said, doubling down on that conference speech from Theresa May, indicating the end of austerity. The eye-catching thing for me was the UK digital services tax. Surprising to see that the UK government is going alone on this, not working with international partners, and that will see a tax on fintech giants being introduced in April 2020.
I noted that the OBR basically said the assumptions around which the costing there and how much it might bring in, which the Treasury has put at 400 million, I think, is super vague, so we'll see how that one plays out. But what about Brexit as well as an underlying backdrop against which the budget was framed?
Yeah, I think the Chancellor's been very clever here. I think there's one domestic policy around taxation, raising the higher rate income threshold of 50,000 and the personal allowance, introducing them a year early in April 2019. That was meant to be 2020. Interestingly, just as Brexit's being delivered. Surprise, surprise, why would he do that? And secondly, I think there's a lot of carrot and stick going on with MPs. The carrot being, well, there'll be lots more money to come for public services and things like that if we get a Brexit deal. That means you better vote for the Brexit deal. The stick being, if we don't get a Brexit deal, then the Chancellor will need to use that money as fiscal firepower, and we may well see a budget, maybe an emergency budget in the spring to 2019.
So the vast majority of the money that's been found by the Chancellor is going on public services and specifically on the NHS. Does business feel that beyond that is a business-friendly budget?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction so far from businesses has been quite positive. The CBI put out messaging that the budget had contained more treats than tricks, sort of predictable Halloween language. And they welcomed initiatives such as the apprenticeship levy and also like sort of investment proposals as well. But they also questioned elements of it, such as how will the UK go it alone on the digital services tax and sort of the practicalities around ending PFI contracts themselves.
As far as the political reaction is concerned, obviously we're keen to know what the DUP makes of the budget because they have threatened potentially to withdraw their support when the vote happens in the next few days.
Yeah, well, that was probably the most interesting reaction that we saw in the Chamber today, sort of the Chancellor announcing this investment to Northern Ireland and also a Belfast City agreement deal, sort of £350 million, looking at Nigel Dodds nodding and Nigel Dodds nodding in return. And Nigel Dodds has also tweeted since saying that the supply agreement is working.
What about Labour? We know it's the toughest job any politician, any political leader ever gets to carry out is answering the budget when you've only had an hour to actually go through it. Jeremy Corbyn sort of waded his way through a noisy House of Commons, but what are the key messages you think Labour are going to major on?
Well, I think Labour will say that they have set the policy direction for this budget. The Chancellor's announcements were almost sort of Labour light, sort of ending the PFI contracts, more NHS spending, ending austerity. It was largely the messaging that Labour probably would put out in a budget if they were to do one. However, they will be highlighting the shortfalls that were included. So there was no mention of climate change. There was more money given to potholes than there was to schools, when school funding is definitely needed. So I think in the coming days we'll see them sort of dissect this budget and find the potholes, as it were.
Indeed. My gut feeling is that the first day's media, the front pages, that still are an incredibly important index, and within government they will look at very closely, will be broadly positive for Philip Hammond, but that hasn't always guaranteed the longer-term success of a budget in the past, and particularly not in this case, where the Chancellor himself has been explicit about so much resting on the success, or otherwise, of Brexit.